Kevin McCarthy has finally, after a number of deals, become the Speaker of the House, including reducing the Pentagon budget. But why is the Pentagon budget so high, twice as high as it was during an actual war? What's going on in there? Hello there, you 6 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now in case the algorithm of certain platforms guides you towards mainstream tripe instead of the ripe, fresh, real deal that we offer you here. If you're watching this in the United States of America, you'll be well aware that Kevin McCarthy has just become the Speaker of the House, the third most powerful person within the US political system, and that it was a protracted and complex process to get him there that involved making deals with hardline Republicans, which means sort of Trump-supporting Republicans, who advocated for a reduction in the Pentagon budget. Why is it that the people that are regarded as the hard right, and I'm just talking about the mainstream perspective on these people, are the only anti-war voices? Has the establishment become so co-opted? Has the liberal establishment ultimately become part of the war machine? And if so, what does liberalism mean? What does democracy mean when these kind of deals are getting done? And why are we not being offered genuine democracy where we're offered the opportunity to talk about the vast amount of money that's spent on a war machine in a country that, according to them, isn't even in a war?
His changing relationship with President Trump, from frostiness to warmth, has fueled accusations of a transactional and malleable leader driven by the pursuit of power more than any specific ideological goal.
He's going to fit right in then. That's all of them, isn't it? Let's see what's going on. Kevin McCarthy agreed to a series of concessions that have been criticised by both centrist Republicans and Democrats in order to win over hardline Republican dissenters in his House speakership bid that took 15 rounds of voting. McCarthy agreed to cap discretionary spending at the levels they were at the beginning of the Biden administration, which could reduce national defense spending by $75 billion, which could be regarded as a positive thing, and not that long ago would have been regarded as a left-wing talking point. That would have been the purview of the Democrats. You know, peaceniks. You can't keep having all these crazy wars, man, going over foreign countries and telling them how to run their world just in order to prop up the military-industrial complex. That's now the job of, Trump supporters. The proposal will no doubt face serious headwinds from more hawkish members of Congress, especially given that this year's Pentagon budget boost easily passed both the House and the Senate. Regardless of the outcome, the proposed deal highlights a significant shift in Republican politics that has taken place in recent years. As Bill Hartung of the Quincy Institute told Responsible Statecraft, GOP lawmakers often gave the Pentagon a pass when they talked about curbing big government, but many Freedom Caucus members now seem determined to cut the military down to size. Those of us that grew up concerned, for example, about the legitimacy of the Iraq War would never have imagined that it would be the Republican Party, let alone the right of the Republican Party, that was advocating for less military expenditure. It shows you now that liberalism has become the new conservative elite, that they have been co-opted by the financial industry and the military-industrial complex, and that the renegade voices, peculiarly, are coming from the right. Whether or not you agree with their social ideology, and I know that a lot of you will and a lot of you won't, it has to be said that the Democrats are now the party of the establishment. This is by Chris Hedges, available on his Substack. The Democrats position themselves as the party of virtue, cloaking their support for the war industry in moral language, stretching back to Korea and Vietnam. All the wars they support and fund are good wars. All the enemies they fight, the latest being Russia's Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping, are incarnations of evil. The photo of a beaming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Kamala Harris holding up a signed Ukrainian battle flag behind Zelensky as he addressed Congress was another example of the Democratic Party's abject subservience to the war machine. So I suppose that in order to serve a war machine, you have to justify the conflict, you have to simplify the narrative and say that these people are egregious villains with malfeasant agenda, and this is like a benign, benevolent kind that, usually life is a little more complicated than that, and the route to war is more complex, and my suspicion is involves capital and finance and profit. There once was a wing of the Democratic Party that questioned and stood up to the war industry, but that opposition evaporated along with the anti-war movement. The opposition to the perpetual funding of the war in Ukraine has come primarily from Republicans, 11 in the Senate and 57 in the House, several, such as Marjorie Taylor Greene, unhinged conspiracy theorists. That's what it requires. This lust for war is dangerous, pushing us into a potential war with Russia and perhaps later with China, each a nuclear power. It is also economically ruinous. The monopolization of of capital by the military has driven US debt to over $30 trillion, $6 trillion more than the US GDP of $24 trillion. Servicing this debt costs $300 billion a year. We spend more on the military than the next 9 countries, including China and Russia combined. Military spending next year is on track to reach its highest level in inflation-adjusted terms since the peaks in the costs of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars between 2008 and 2011, and the second highest in inflation-adjusted terms since World War II, a level that is more than the budgets of the next 10 largest cabinet agencies combined. So I suppose that the power of the American war machine is more powerful than the next 10 countries combined and the next 10 departments within the US political system combined. In a sense, it is fair, and you tell me in the comments if you agree with this, to regard America as essentially wrapped around a certain set of interests that can be tracked financially, that all of the subsequent cultural artifacts and apparent political procedures seem to, regardless of who is in office, lead to this enhanced expenditure. And I suppose that's why it's interesting that the right of the Republican Party is the only place where you would find anti-war radicalism, even if it isn't underwritten in the way we might previously have understood it by sort of long hairs and flowers down the barrel of a gun, but more a kind of libertarian unwillingness to spend American tax dollars on foreign wars, or perhaps even more precisely, extract American tax dollars from ordinary people and put them into the hands of corporations. And I, as a person that would not that long ago have regarded myself as a sort of left-wing person, now I don't think that either of those wings have any validity, can see the rationale in that argument. Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments what you think. The Democratic Party, which under the Clinton administration aggressively courted corporate donors, has surrendered its willingness to challenge, however tepidly, the war industry. Our conversation with Glenn Greenwald took us into that territory in depth, where Greenwald explained that since Clinton, the Democrat Party has been the party of the establishment. That means that their ties to enterprises that transcend democratic procedure, like the financial industry, the military-industrial complex, are so entrenched that ultimately they cannot operate at the service of ordinary people because they are owned. They have been co-opted by transcendent interests. On the eve of every congressional vote on the Pentagon budget, lobbyists from businesses tied to the war industry meet with Congress members and their staff to push them to vote for the budget to protect jobs in their district or state. This pressure, coupled with the mantra amplified by the media that opposition to the profligate war funding is unpatriotic, keeps elected officials in bondage. These politicians also depend on the lavish donations from the weapons manufacturers to fund their campaigns. So in a sense, it is ultimately theatre. What we participate in every 4 years or at the midterms in your country amounts to just the sort of shuffling of personnel that will ultimately fulfill the will and interests of the organisations that fund them. So even to call it a democracy at this point is kind of ridiculous, because you can't meaningfully impact or manipulate how your money will ultimately be spent. So you find yourself in a position where you have to think, well, how can I extract myself from that system? What do I do if neither of those parties suit me anymore? If my interests are not represented on any level? And of course, none of us really have time to think like that, either because of financial and economic pressure or because we're being continually agitated by what's commonly known as the culture war, forgetting that most people have more interests in common with one another than they do with these elite institutions that are vacuuming all of your resources into a centralised pool, and where the ability to prohibit that is being continually curtailed.
In a quirk of fate, the day's drama took place as the rest of America marked the anniversary of the 6th of January attack on the Capitol.
If the reality is that the movements and decisions that are made in Congress is ultimately determined by the expenditure of the lobbying industry and the financial interests of the people in Congress, which I would say is pretty clear that that's what's happening, why all the sanctimony and sentimentality? Oh no, January the 6th, or putting up a new board for Kevin McCarthy. Just leave up the old one for Nancy Pelosi. It's going to be the same sort of deals that go on. Instead of Apple, it'll be Raytheon. Instead of Facebook, it'll be Lockheed Martin. Who cares? Who do you think is ultimately benefiting? How is your life going to be changed by what takes place here? We've just heard how it truly functions. Oh, January 6th, that was a terrible time. That's where we do some of our best corruption in there. Oh. Bridges, roads, levees, rail, port, electric grids, sewage treatment plants and drinking water infrastructures are structurally deficient and antiquated. Schools are in disrepair and lack sufficient teachers and staff. You sort of forget, don't you, that there are different ways to organise society. There is different ways to spend money. There are different ways of empowering communities and the individual. All this is forgotten in a giddy blur of too much information, so much propaganda, so much that it's impossible to discern that, oh, actually, yeah, you could probably break these budgets down, empower states and communities within that state, elect democratically how to spend that money, allow people to culturally live however they want to, whether that's right wing or left wing or religious or irreligious or whatever, just live a more localized life. Unable to stem the COVID-19 pandemic, the for-profit healthcare industry forces families, including those with insurance, into bankruptcy. Domestic manufacturing, especially with the offshoring of jobs to China, Vietnam, Mexico, and other nations that you're supposed to hate, collapses. Families are drowning in personal debt, with 63% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. These are all issues that could be altered and resolved in a true democracy. There isn't nothing you can do about that. There's a clear process of the extraction of wealth taking place, and we just have to be distracted from that with bombast and bludgeoning and terrifying information and an inability to critically think. Seymour Melman, who coined the term permanent war economy, noted that since the end of the Second World War, the federal government has spent more than half its discretionary budget on past, current and future military operations. Half of all of its money, so half of it goes on everything else and half of it goes on war. But we're not in a war. Yeah, but what about past wars? And we are in a little war. And what about future war? What is this? Christmas Carol? It is the largest single sustaining activity of the government. Right, that is the business of government. The military-industrial establishment is nothing more than gilded corporate welfare. Military systems are sold before they're produced. Military industries are permitted to charge the federal government for huge cost overruns. Massive profits are guaranteed. For example, this November, the Army awarded Raytheon Technologies alone more than $2 billion in contracts, on top of over $190 million awarded in August to deliver missile systems to expand or replenish weapons sent to Ukraine. You better believe that war's important, baby. You better believe that Putin's evil and that Zelensky's like, might as well be Joey from Friends. Because if you try and look for any more complexity than that, you might start thinking, could you build us a school or something? Or at least half a school? No, you can have none of a school and 2 weapon systems to Zelensky. Hey, how you doing? Despite a depressed market for most other businesses, stock prices of Lockheed and Northrop Grumman have risen by more than 36 and 50% this year. I wonder if any people in Congress have invested in them. Tech giants, including Amazon, which supplies surveillance and facial recognition software to the police and FBI, have been absorbed into the permanent war economy. Amazon, Google, Microsoft and Oracle were awarded multi-billion-dollar cloud computing contracts for the joint warfighting cloud capability and are eligible to receive $9 billion in Pentagon contracts to provide the military with globally available cloud services across all security domains and classification levels, from the strategic level to the tactical edge, through mid-2028. So, we know roughly when that war will end. Foreign aid is given to countries that requires foreign governments to buy weapon systems from the US. The US public funds the research, development and building of the weapon systems and purchases them for foreign governments. Such a circular system mocks the idea of a free market economy. You pay for it, you develop it, but when it comes to the profit, that's the bit where it disappears. You're with it all the way. So we're going to be developing some missiles. Oh God, that's good. That's fascinating. And now we're going to be selling those missiles. Oh great, good luck. And now we're going to be dropping those missiles on, broadly speaking, innocent people. Oh, nice work, great. And did you make any money on that? Why don't you mind your own fucking goddamn business? January the 16th is round again. It's the WEF Davos Convention, and that is why we are presenting the WEF Royal Rumble. Join us for an extended stream where we'll be looking at Klaus Schwab and all of his pals from around the world, tech giants, politicians, former WF stooges that include all of these world leaders. Who will be representing Pfizer? Who will be representing Big Tech? What's Rishi Sunak gonna do there? Will we get to see Mark Zuckerberg? Who will be the Undertaker? Who will be Hulk Hogan? Who will be the Ultimate Warrior? And who will be the Ultimate Victims? We already know who that is. Join us for an extended stream, 7 a.m. PT, 10 a.m. ET, and 3 p.m. GMT. I can't think of a sign for it. You get the idea. WF Royal Rumble. See you there. Stay free. These weapons soon become obsolete and are replaced by updated and usually more costly weapon systems. So even if they don't use them, they have to update them like an iPhone. I don't think people care whether the bomb that was dropped on them was obsolete. Oh my God, that's like an iPhone 3. This is barely going to hurt at all. It is, in economic terms, a dead end. It sustains nothing but the permanent war economy. So I suppose all you have to do is look at who benefits from this situation, and then that's who's determining the situation. What we're told is this is inevitable and unavoidable, there's all this evil going on, and then, oh, what a convenient side effect of this terrible pandemic, war or whatever, is that these people are making loads of money. Yeah, I know, it's a shame and a weird coincidence, isn't it? And to point that out is, of course, a conspiracy. In 2014, the US backed a coup in Ukraine that installed a government that included neo-Nazis Nazis and was antagonistic to Russia. The coup triggered a civil war when the ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine, the Donbass, sought to secede from the country, resulting in over 14,000 people dead and nearly 150,000 people displaced before Russia invaded in February. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, according to Jacques Bald, a former NATO secretary advisor who also worked for Swiss intelligence, was instigated by the escalation of Ukraine's war on the Donbass. It also followed the Biden administration's rejection of proposals sent by the Kremlin in late 2021, which might have averted Russia's invasion the following year. So I don't think anyone is saying that Putin is anything other than a warlord, a tyrant, a dictator. I don't think anyone's saying that wouldn't it be great to live in Russia, or that the Ukrainian people's suffering isn't real and horrific. It's just pointing out that there's all of this profiteering and there's all of this agitation. And why aren't the mainstream media telling you? Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments why you think that might be. The invasion has led to widespread US and EU sanctions on Russia, which have boomeranged onto Europe. Inflation ravages Europe with the sharp curtailment of shipments of Russian oil and gas. Industry, especially in Germany, is crippled. In most of Europe, it's a winter of shortages, spiralling prices, and misery. One might imagine when they were coming up with this strategy that extracts all of these public tax dollars from American people, puts them in the hands of private industry, that a likely outcome would be sanctions between Russia and Europe. And of course, it would be quite quick to calculate that, well, that's not really going to affect us much, is it? Because I'm not impoverished and living in Europe, unable to pay a gas bill. When you have a stratified society where the most powerful people are not affected by the consequences of their actions, you are going to get actions that are negative to ordinary people. That is what democracy is supposed to prevent. But when you have a democracy that is already sewn up and stitched up by lobbying and vested interests and a convergence of interests, even where there isn't conspiracy, what you're going to end up with is one strata of society that's doing incredibly well and hundreds of millions of people that are suffering enormously. Does that sound familiar? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Remember, turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now. Otherwise, you simply will not receive this great content that we make every single day, because we are determined to give you the information so that you can make decisions for yourself. More important than any of that is that you please stay free.